breaking the chains of a white wolf. She saw the Alpha King transform and claim her as his queen. She had been born to heal, to ease suffering where others could not. But in the quiet, peaceful village at the edge of the kingdom, she had never imagined that her life would change in an instant. That it would be caught in the webs of royal curses, of kings and wolves, of ancient bloodlines. The day the soldiers arrived, the sky had been streaked with clouds, as though the heavens themselves had foreseen the storm to come. Ilara, the captain of the royal guard, had called as she stood in the doorway of her humble cottage, the scent of herbs still heavy in the air. "The Alpha King summons you." The words fell upon her like a curse, though she knew little of the darkness that lay ahead. The soldiers had no choice but to drag her away, her hands bound by rough ropes as they led her to the royal castle. The forest, once her sanctuary, became a distant memory, fading behind her like a forgotten dream. Inside the walls of the castle, the air was thick with unease. Shadows clung to the stone walls, and the flicker of torches did little to banish the cold. The grand hall stretched high above her, its ceilings lost in darkness. Every step Ilara took echoed, each one a reminder that she was no longer in control of her destiny. Her heart raced as they led her down winding corridors. She was a healer, yes, but she had never been summoned to the royal court, never imagined being dragged into the web of royal power and ancient magic. They reached a set of iron doors at the end of the hall. The guard motioned to her to enter, and without another word, they left her standing alone in the vast chamber. The room was dark, lit only by the flickering flames from a great hearth. In the center of it all stood a throne, but it was not the throne that caught her attention. It was the man who stood beside it, tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that was both regal and terrifying. His eyes were as dark as the night, and his face was carved from stone, unmoving, unreadable. He was the Alpha King, Kairos, the ruler of the kingdom. And his curse had brought her here. "Ilara," he spoke, his voice low and commanding, yet tinged with a hint of something she could not place. "You've been summoned for a reason. The chains that bind me cannot be broken by just any hand. Only one with pure blood can undo the magic." She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "Chains?" she asked, the word strange in her mouth. Kairos's gaze never wavered as he stepped closer, the weight of his presence pressing upon her. "You will see them soon enough. But first you must know the truth." Ilara took a cautious step back, her thoughts racing. She had heard whispers of the Alpha King's curse, the beast he became under the full moon, the terror he wrought in the night. But the truth, the full truth, was something only the nobles dared to speak of. "You are a healer," Kairos continued, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "You possess a rare magic. You can break bonds, magical chains, bloodlines twisted by curses. But you are not the only one of your kind. There are others like you, hiding in the shadows, their powers locked away, their true destinies hidden from the world. Your bloodline is one of them." Ilara's mind raced. Her mother had always told her to stay hidden, to keep her powers secret. She had been trained to heal, to calm the restless spirits of the wounded. But this was something far beyond what she had ever imagined. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why bring me here?" The Alpha King's eyes darkened. "Because your blood is the key. My curse can only be undone by someone with the magic of the ancients, someone who can see the chains for what they are." The room seemed to grow colder. Ilara shivered, though she could not say whether it was the chill of the room or the weight of his words pressing down on her. "Please," she said, her voice trembling, "tell me what I must do." He turned away from her then, his steps slow and deliberate as he moved toward the far wall. She could hear the soft scrape of metal against stone as he touched something hidden in the shadows. When he turned back, his face was grim, and in his hands he held a chain, a thick silver rope that seemed to pulse with a dark energy of its own. "These chains," he said, holding them out to her, "are my curse. Each link is a part of me, my blood, my soul. I am bound by them, enslaved by them, and only you, Alara, can break them." Alara stared at the chains, feeling the weight of their power even from a distance. She could feel the pull of the magic in the air, thick and suffocating. She had never dealt with something like this before. "But how?" she asked. "How can I possibly break something like this?" Kairos's gaze softened for the first time and something flickered in his eyes, something almost like desperation. "You must unlock the magic within you. Use the power you've always known but never understood. Only then will you be able to release me from these chains." He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know it is a heavy burden, but I have no choice. You are my only hope." Alara hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at her insides. She had never wanted power, never wanted to be caught up in the dangerous games of the kingdom. But the Alpha King's words echoed in her mind, stirring something deep within her. She had always known there was more to her magic than what she had been taught. Perhaps it was time to unlock it. "I will try," she whispered. The Alpha King nodded, his expression unreadable once again. "You will have to be strong. The chains will resist. The magic within them is ancient and unforgiving." Alara nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her heart. As she stepped forward to take the chains, a distant howling echoed through the castle walls, a sound like the roar of a wolf, fierce and wild. It sent a shiver down her spine, and for the first time she realized the true weight of what she was about to undertake. The Alpha King's curse was not just a burden on him. It was a curse that could destroy them both. And as she reached out for the chains, she knew her life would never be the same again. Cliffhanger. Kairos's face twisted with a mixture of pain and fear as his eyes locked with hers. "No," he whispered, barely audible. "Not yet. The moon, it's too soon." Before Alara could react, a terrible, bone-chilling growl erupted from the darkness, and Kairos fell to his knees, clutching his chest. The transformation was beginning. The castle was cold, but it wasn't just the stone walls or the lack of warmth from the flickering hearth. It was something deeper, something that seeped into the very bones of those who lived within the castle. Alara could feel it every time she walked through the darkened halls, every time she passed a window and saw the moonlit sky hanging over the kingdom like a silent watcher. That night, as she sat by the fire in her chamber, Alara couldn't shake the haunting memory of the howling. It echoed through her mind as if the very walls of the castle had absorbed the sound of it, keeping it alive in the silence. The growl of the Alpha King's transformation, the raw power of it. And she couldn't stop thinking about the way his eyes had looked at her, the way they held something deeper than just need. Fear, perhaps, or maybe desperation. She was the key to his freedom, Kairos had said. But how could she be? She was just a healer. She had always lived in the quiet forest, tending to the needs of her village. Magic to her was a gift she had learned to wield over time, never fully understanding its true power. But now she could feel it. The ancient bloodline that Kairos spoke of was awakening in her. The magic in her veins was stirring, eager to be set free. The days that followed were filled with long, silent hours spent in the dungeons of the castle. Alara was not a prisoner, but she might as well have been. The guards kept watch over her, their eyes wary as though expecting something to happen. Every now and then the Alpha King would visit her, though his presence felt like a shadow in the room, heavy and full of secrets. He never spoke much. He would stand at the edge of her chamber, his expression unreadable, his gaze distant. And yet, every time Alara looked at him, she felt something within herself stir. It was not just the curse that held him in place. It was something deeper, something that tethered him to her in ways she could not explain. One evening, after a long day of silence, Kairos entered her chamber without warning. His eyes, dark and intense, met hers with a quiet force that made her heart race. "Alara," he said, his voice like the distant rumble of thunder, "the time is coming." "The time for what?" Alara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The full moon," he replied. "It's almost here, and I need your help." Her breath caught in her throat. The full moon. the night of his transformation. She had heard the stories, whispered by the servants, about the terrible beast the Alpha King became, but she had never seen it for herself. "Why me?" she asked again, as if it were the only question that mattered. "Why do you think I can help you?" Kairos's gaze softened for a moment, and Alara caught a glimpse of the man beneath the king, the man who had been lost to the curse for so long. "Because you are the only one who can break the chains." Alara felt a pang of uncertainty deep within her. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else entirely, but there was no denying the pull she felt when she looked at him. Something deep within her responded to his need, his pain. "I can't do this alone," he continued, his voice low. "I don't know how much longer I can control the beast inside me." Alara took a slow breath, her hands trembling. "What do you need me to do?" Kairos stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the floor as he approached her. "You must help me break the chains, all of them. The physical chains are just the beginning, but there are others, chains that bind my very soul. The curse is older than you or I, and it will not be broken easily." A wave of understanding washed over Alara, and with it came the undeniable truth. She was more than just a healer. She was the one who had been chosen to break the chains, not just the physical ones, but the spiritual ones as well. "You must prepare yourself," he said, his voice growing softer. "There is no turning back once you begin this. You will be tied to me in ways you cannot yet understand." Alara hesitated, then nodded. There was no turning back. She had felt the pull of something greater than herself ever since she stepped foot into this castle. And now, as Kairos stood before her, there was no more doubt. She had to help him. There was no choice. Later that night, as the moon began its slow rise in the sky, Alara sat alone in her chamber, her mind spinning with the weight of what had been asked of her. The full moon was not far off. She could feel its pull even from here, the energy of it stirring in the air. She had to be ready, but the fear that clung to her was not only for the unknown power that lay within her. It was for Kairos, for the man she had begun to see beyond the king. She had seen him in moments of weakness, in the rare moments when the curse loosened its grip just enough for him to be something other than a monster. She had seen the man who had once been a ruler, strong, fierce, and proud. And she had seen the pain in his eyes, the isolation that the curse had brought him. But no matter how much she wanted to help him, part of her feared that breaking the chains would not bring the freedom they both longed for. What if breaking the chains would mean losing him? What if it would destroy him completely? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. The guard entered, his face grave. "Alara," he said, his voice low, "the Alpha King is ready." The full moon had risen high in the sky by the time Alara arrived at the chamber where Kairos waited. She found him standing in front of the large mirror, his back to her, as if he was preparing for something far beyond what she could imagine. The light from the moon outside seemed to shimmer against the glass, casting an eerie glow over him. "Alara," he said, his voice low and strained, "it is time." Without turning to face her, Kairos began to undo the buttons of his tunic. Alara's heart skipped a beat as his broad back came into view, and her breath caught in her throat when she saw the dark, jagged scars running across his skin. They were the remnants of the chains, magical bonds that had been placed upon him long ago, marking him forever. She stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of the chains. These chains are a part of you," she whispered, feeling the raw magic that pulsed from them. Kairos's voice came in a low rasp. "I am nothing without them. The curse has bound me in ways I cannot escape." Alara reached out, placing her hands on his skin, feeling the heat that radiated from him. She closed her eyes and focused on the magic inside her. The bloodline that ran through her veins had always been there, dormant until now. But now it stirred, eager to help, to heal. "Let me try," she said softly. With a deep breath, she closed her eyes and began to concentrate. The chains began to glow, faintly at first, as though the magic itself was responding to her. And then, as the moonlight bathed them in its glow, the chains pulsed with power, wrapping themselves tighter around Kairos. And then the howl came again. It was deeper this time, stronger. Kairos's face twisted in agony. His hands clenched into fists as his body began to shake. "Alara now," he growled through gritted teeth. Her heart raced as she focused her magic, pulling on the ancient bloodline within her. The chains glowed brighter, the air thick with power. But the struggle was far from over. It had only just begun. Cliffhanger. As the chains began to crack under the pressure, Alara felt a surge of power. But just as the last of the chains was about to break, a terrible roar filled the air, and the Alpha King's transformation began in earnest. Alara barely had time to react before she was thrown back, the force of his change too much to withstand. She saw the last of the chains snap, and then before her stood not the man she knew but a great white wolf. The transformation was complete, and Alara was no longer sure if she could control what was to come next. The castle was still and silent, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Alara stood at the edge of the moonlit chamber, her hands still trembling from the magic that had passed through her. The transformation had been swift, but violent, and now before her stood the Alpha King in his true form, a massive white wolf, with fur as pale as the moon and eyes that burned with an intensity that spoke of both pain and power. She had seen glimpses of the beast before, but now, standing in its presence, the raw power of it sent shivers through her spine. The wolf was beautiful in its ferocity, but it was also dangerous. There was no denying that. The beast's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment Alara stood frozen, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. But then, with a sudden shift, the wolf lowered its massive head. The growl that rumbled in its chest was not one of aggression, but of pain. The bond between them was real. She could feel it, the thread that tied her to the beast and through it to the man who had once been bound by chains. This was more than just the curse. This was a connection neither of them had expected. She took a careful step forward. "Kairos?" Her voice was soft, hesitant, as though speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile thread of understanding between them. The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to hold still. The Alpha King, the beast, was listening. "Alara," the voice that came from the wolf's mouth was hoarse, a whisper of the man who had once spoken so commanding. Stay close." Her heart skipped a beat. There was no mistake now. This was Kairos, his soul trapped inside the creature's body, but the voice was unmistakably his. Alara stepped closer, heart racing. She could feel the warmth of the wolf's body, the power that coursed beneath its fur. But there was something more, something dark and fragile about the wolf's presence. Something that told her this transformation, no matter how magnificent it seemed, was just the beginning. "Let me help you," she whispered, her fingers brushing the wolf's fur gently. "I can feel the chains, Kairos. They're still there." The wolf's eyes closed briefly, and the sound of his heavy breathing was the only response. The transformation had only broken the surface. The chains that held him in place were not just physical, they were emotional, spiritual. And Alara was beginning to understand just how deep the curse ran. The next few days passed in a blur. Alara spent most of her time in the castle's library, poring over ancient texts about the curse, about the bloodlines that could break it, and about the mysterious chains that held Kairos in his monstrous form. Every moment she spent with the Alpha King, whether in his human or wolf form, only deepened the bond between them. It was like an invisible thread pulling them closer, even though they both knew that the future was uncertain. Kairos had begun to show her more of his true self, more than just the terrifying beast or the silent king. In his rare moments of humanity, his eyes would soften when they met hers, and he would speak in quiet tones, as if he feared the connection between them would shatter if he spoke too loudly. At night, Alara would lie awake in her chamber, her thoughts consumed by the strange, growing bond that tied her to him. She had always known that her magic was powerful, but this was something beyond her understanding, something that had been awakened by the curse. But even as the bond between them grew, danger was closing in. There were whispers in the castle, dark rumors of a rival faction that sought to destroy Kairos and claim the throne for themselves. The sorceress who had once been a close advisor to the king had disappeared, only to return with a new allegiance. And her magic, dark and twisted, had the potential to break everything Alara and Kairos had fought to protect. Alara could feel the tension in the air. It was suffocating. The walls of the castle were closing in, and she knew they didn't have much time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow across the sky, Kairos appeared before Alara in his human form. There was something different in the way he moved, a quiet urgency that hadn't been there before. His face was pale, drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes were more focused than ever. "Alara," he said, his voice steady despite the weariness that clung to him. "There is something you need to know." She looked up from the book she was reading, her heart racing at the serious tone in his voice. "What is it?" I can feel it," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with a strange intensity. "The curse is weakening, but so is my control. The wolf, he's getting harder to contain." Alara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "What do you mean?" she asked, rising from her seat. "You've been managing it." His jaw tightened and he looked away, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "The chains have been broken, but the magic that holds me is still here, still pulling at my soul. I can feel it, it's like a fire inside me, burning and threatening to consume everything. The wolf is becoming more than just a curse. He's becoming a part of me." Alara stepped closer, her hand reaching out to him. "Kairos, we'll figure this out. Together we can break the last of the chains." He met her gaze, his eyes full of quiet pain. "I hope you're right, because if the chains aren't fully broken, if we don't do this soon, I may not be able to hold the wolf back anymore." The weight of his words sank deep into her chest. She could see the fear in his eyes, the fear that the very thing he had been running from for so long would finally break free, that the beast would consume him completely. "Alara," he whispered, his voice barely audible, I can't do this without you." Her heart twisted at the raw emotion in his words. She knew that his vulnerability was rare, and she knew that the bond between them was stronger than anything she had ever felt before. But she also knew that the path ahead was dangerous. They were running out of time. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Alara's powers grew. The connection between her and Kairos deepened, and as they faced the growing threat from the rival faction, she could sense the balance shifting. The wolf's presence in Kairos was becoming more and more difficult to control. But the bond they shared also gave her strength, strength to face the darkness that threatened to tear them apart. One night, as the full moon once again rose high above the kingdom, Kairos's transformation began in earnest. This time, Alara was prepared. She stood before him, her hands steady as she called upon the magic that had been awakened in her. "I will not let you go," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet determination. The transformation was slow at first, but then, as the full moon reached its peak, the beast inside Kairos broke free. His body twisted, bones cracking and reshaping as the wolf emerged, larger than ever before. The sound of his transformation echoed through the castle like the roar of a storm. But this time, as the wolf's eyes locked onto hers, Alara didn't flinch. She stood firm, reaching out to him with both hands, calling upon the bond that tied them together. And as the wolf let out a final, deafening roar, Alara could feel the last of the chains begin to snap. Cliffhanger. The roar faded into silence, and in the darkness of the chamber, Alara could see the outline of the wolf, still huge, still powerful, but now changed. And as the moonlight washed over him, something unexpected happened. The wolf's form began to shift back. its powerful body shrinking, reshaping, until there, kneeling before her, was Kairos once again, his body covered in scars, his eyes wild with a mix of relief and fear. But something was different now. His eyes no longer held the same pain. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion, "I am free, but at what cost?" The morning after the transformation, the castle was eerily quiet. Ilara stood at the window of her chamber, watching the first light of dawn spill across the vast landscape. She could feel the weight of the night's events pressing against her chest. Kairos had broken free from the curse, but the freedom they had fought for was still uncertain. The chains had been broken, but the scars, both visible and hidden, remained. Kairos was different now. The pain in his eyes had softened, but a new darkness had taken its place. It was as if the freedom he had longed for had come at a terrible price, one neither of them fully understood. Ilara turned from the window, her heart heavy with 1,000 unanswered questions. Her magic, her bloodline, had played a part in breaking the curse. But now she found herself at the center of a much larger web, one that would determine the fate of not only the Alpha King, but the kingdom itself. The castle was on edge. News had spread of Kairos's transformation, and the rumors began to grow like a storm on the horizon. Some whispered that he was no longer the king they once knew. Some said he had become something more, something dangerous. Others feared that the rival faction, led by the powerful sorceress Morwen, would strike now that Kairos was vulnerable. Ilara couldn't help but feel the pull of the power that surrounded them. The magic she had used to break the curse was wild and untamed, and with it came responsibility. She had known for some time that her bloodline was more than just a gift. It was a key to a future she had never imagined. But now that the curse had been lifted, Ilara could feel the weight of the throne pressing on her as well. The kingdom needed a ruler who could unify the people, someone who could protect them from the rising threat. That someone was not Kairos alone. Ilara had come to realize that she was not just a healer. She was something far more powerful. The bond between her and Kairos was undeniable, and she had felt the power of the throne calling to her. But there was no denying the truth. If they were to defeat Morwen and restore balance to the kingdom, they would need to face the darkness together. It was the third day after the transformation when Kairos found Ilara in the courtyard, standing alone beneath the towering stone walls of the castle. He approached her slowly, his footsteps heavy, but his presence still commanding. His transformation had left him physically weakened, but his resolve was stronger than ever. "Ilara," he said, his voice rough, still hoarse from the ordeal, "we cannot run from this anymore. The kingdom needs us, both of us. We cannot allow the darkness to take over." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I know, but we can't face it alone. The magic inside me, it's powerful, but it's not enough to stop her. We need more." Kairos stepped closer, his eyes narrowing with thought. "You're right. Morwen is a force to be reckoned with, but she is not just a sorceress. She's a ruler in her own right, and she believes the throne belongs to her." Ilara frowned. "She's already been controlling things from the shadows. Her influence has grown, but there's something else. She's not just after power, she wants to control you, Kairos. She wants to use your curse, your power, to bend the kingdom to her will." Kairos clenched his fists, the tension in his body palpable. "I will not allow it. I am the king, and I will fight for my throne." "For our throne." Ilara felt a surge of emotion at his words. She had always known that his pride and duty ran deep, but now, more than ever, she realized just how much of his soul was bound to the kingdom. His connection to it was more than blood, it was his purpose, his reason for existing. And now that purpose was entwined with hers. "You're not alone in this," she said, stepping closer to him. "I won't leave you. Whatever happens next, we face it together." Kairos's gaze softened, and for the first time in days, Ilara saw the man behind the king, the vulnerability that he rarely allowed to show. "You have become more than just my ally. You are my strength, Ilara, my queen." Alara's breath caught at the weight of his words. They had shared so much pain, magic, and power, but this was something she hadn't expected. She had never thought of herself as a queen. She had never imagined that her destiny would be tied to a king's. But now she understood. The bond between them wasn't just born of magic. It was born of something deeper, something that tied their fates together. That night, as the moon rose high in the sky, the tension in the castle reached its breaking point. Alara and Kyra stood side by side on the balcony, watching the distant horizon. The kingdom was quiet, but the air was thick with anticipation. They knew that Morwen's forces were close. "Alara," Kyra said quietly, his voice full of resolve. "It is time." Alara nodded, her heart steady despite the weight of the moment. She could feel the magic within her, the ancient power of her bloodline, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. The time had come to claim their future, to take control of the kingdom's fate. But as they prepared to leave the safety of the castle walls, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was one of the royal guards, his face pale and filled with fear. "Alara, your majesty," the guard said, his voice trembling. "It's Morwen. She's already here." Alara's heart skipped a beat. They had known the sorceress was coming, but they hadn't anticipated this. Morwen had arrived with a full force of soldiers and magic. It was now or never. Kyros's eyes burned with determination. "We fight. We claim what is ours." The battle was fierce. Morwen's forces were strong, but they were no match for the combined power of Kyros and Alara. She stood by his side, her magic surging through her as she called upon the power of the ancients. The energy she felt was wild, untamed, and yet, when it flowed through her, she felt at peace. This was her purpose. This was the reason she had been brought to this kingdom. Kyros fought with the strength of the wolf inside him, his movements swift and powerful, his every strike a testament to the years of pain he had endured. The enemy seemed to fall back with each blow, but Morwen herself remained, standing at the heart of the battle, her eyes filled with hatred and ambition. "You cannot win," Morwen sneered, her voice like ice. "This kingdom is mine. You were never meant to rule Kyros. And neither of you will leave this place alive." But Kyros didn't flinch. His eyes burned with a fury unlike anything Alara had seen before. "You have no power here, Morwen." With a final, decisive strike, Kyros stepped forward and drove his sword through the heart of the sorceress's forces, breaking her spell. But Morwen's magic still lingered, a dark presence that tried to wrap around them like a vice. Alara stepped forward, raising her hands, and the magic in her flared, the ancient power that had been awakened within her now fully in her control. She closed her eyes and called upon the full force of her bloodline, her voice ringing out in the night. "By the blood of the ancients, by the magic of the land," she cried, her power crackling around her. "We claim this throne." The air crackled with energy, and as Morwen's last spell unraveled, Alara felt the final barrier fall. Morwen screamed in fury as her power dissolved, leaving her powerless before them. Cliffhanger. With the battle won, Kyros turned to Alara, his eyes full of pride and love. But as they stood there, the weight of the moment settling between them, the castle's great bell began to toll. The kingdom had been saved, but their journey was far from over. "Alara," Kyros whispered, his voice full of hope. "We have won, but what comes next?" Alara looked at him, her heart full of a love and determination she had never known before. "What comes next is ours to claim." And together they walked into the future, their future, ready to rule, ready to rebuild, and ready to face whatever challenges awaited them.